In this section, we're actually going to see controllers in action. We're going to do that by creating our first page. So I'm going to go in my app directory. I'm going to right click and say new file. And I'm going to call this file event details. This page is going to show the detailed information about a single event. Both the information about the event, such as the name and location and time, and also the information about each session in the event. So I'll start out this page by just pasting in a very simple HTML header. I'm using the container class from Twitter Bootstrap. And then I also need to close up my body in HTML. In addition to this, I'm going to want to put all my script tags in so that Angular can run and I can have references to all of the Angular pieces that I need. So of the scripts that I pasted in, the first three I just pasted in case I need them, jQuery underscore and Bootstrap. The real scripts that matter here are Angular and app. Angular, of course, is the Angular library, and app.js is my starting script that loads up the module for this application. And now we're actually ready to make this file do some stuff. So we're going to start out by going up into the HTML tag. I'm going to add my ng app. Now remember, in our app.js file, we named our app events app. That's this right here. So I'm going to put that same name over here. And that tells Angular that this is the module that runs this page. Now that I've got that in place, we're going to add our first controller. Right here, I'm going to add a div. And I'm going to tell Angular that this div is owned by one of my controllers. I name the controller Event Controller. This controller is going to be responsible for rendering information about an event. So now I've told Angular that this is the controller that manages this div, but I haven't actually created this controller. So I'll do that by adding it to controllers. And now we can code up this controller. Now I always like to be in strict mode. And in order to create a controller, I'm going to reference that same module which I created in the app.js file, which you'll remember was named events app. And use the controller function, and then pass in the name of the controller. And now my second parameter is actually a function which will be the controller itself. Now remember how we talked about the relationship between controllers and scope. Controllers are responsible for creating scope. So they actually receive an empty scope in, and then they populate that scope with the information that is going to be needed by the view. Now that I've got my controller created, I'm going to need to add the script file to the page that we created. And I'm going to do that after my app.js. And now that that's all hooked up, let's go ahead and view this in the browser and see how it looks. So you can see that there's really nothing exciting going on. We haven't put any renderable HTML on the page, and the controller isn't doing anything. So let's go back, and let's actually make the controller display something. I'm going to go into the controller, and I'm going to create an event item. Now this event item is going to represent an event. I'm just going to use an inline JavaScript object here. In a real application, you'd actually pull this from a server somewhere. So I'm going to give my event some basic information. Now let's go and display some of this information in the page. I'm going to go inside of the div that's controlled by my controller, and I'm going to add some Angular markup that will display the name of the event. Let's go look at that in the browser. And we can see that it's displaying the name of the event. Let's add a few more items. Okay, everything's rendering out okay. Now let's analyze what we've done. You can see here these double curly braces. These tell Angular that whatever is inside those curly braces is an expression that Angular should evaluate and then replace and put into the page. So I've prefixed everything with event. Let's go back to our controller and look at what it's got. The scope object has an event object. So what's going on here inside the page, anything within this div that is controlled by my controller has any object that exists on the scope. So event, which also exists on the scope, is now available, and I can write it in and access any properties and print them out to the page. This markup format with these expressions is the simplest way to put information on a page with Angular. So now we got basic information displaying on the page, but let's make it look just a little bit prettier. So let's go in and add a navigation bar. Okay, let's see how that looks. Alright, better. Now let's also go into our event controller and style that up a little bit. Alright, let's see how that looks. Okay, now that's starting to look a little bit better. Now some information that we're missing about our event is the location where the event is located at. So let's go back into our controller. Let's add that information. But this time, I don't want to just put the address right on the root of the event object. It makes more sense to me that there's a location object that contains the address information. Now let's go put that into our page. Now let's check that out. Alright, looking good. And we can see the benefit we're getting out of Twitter Bootstrap. Just makes everything look a lot nicer. Now let's talk about what we've done here. You can see that inside of this markup, I'm actually drilling down inside of the event, inside the location object, to a property that I want to render. Again, this is Angular handling this for us and actually allowing us to drill down in, so we don't have to format our data in a simple single level. Instead, we can actually let the data be shaped in a way that makes sense. Now, one other thing I would like to add that I think will make our sessions look a little sharper is some kind of an image to indicate the event. I've thrown one of the logos for Angular into my image directory, and I'm going to reference that. So now I can go back to my HTML page, and right up here at the top, I'm going to add that image. So you can see that I'm using the same kind of markup that I'm using down below in order to get the image URL out of the event, but I'm also doing something a little unique. Instead of using the source attribute on the image, I'm using the ng-source attribute. What this does is delays the requesting of the image until Angular has a chance to replace this text right here with the actual URL for the image. Otherwise, as soon as the HTML renders, your browser will kick off a request to find an image at this URL, which of course is going to return a 404. I'd also like to give this an alt attribute. I'm going to use the event name again. Alright, let's see how that looks in our browser. Great. This is starting to come together. Now one more small adjustment I want to make is just add a little bit of extra padding on the sides.